Man, hey, thank you for the time. I've needed to do this for a while, and I get random questions. I'm like, and I'm one of those. If you ask me something in the mortgage space, then I'll answer it. If you ask me something in the real estate space, for as far as contracts or realtor jobs, even though I know the answer more than most of the realtors that ask me, or for clients that ask me, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to put it back to the realtor because I want to hear directly from them. And some of these legal questions, some of them I really do not know the answer to. And especially now with all the contract changes take place, I'm not sure of some of them. So for me to be able to randomly just reach out, pop you a message, say, hey man, let's jump on a call. Because man, I know people would love to hear it, directly from you on some of these things, on what your perspective is. So the one that's come up, and this happened recently it was twofold reasons. If a seller lists their house, they get a listing on their house and they accept that contract. And what's happened to me on my end a couple of times is people put their house on the market, get it under contract, and then the realtor tells them to call me to get a loan, and they can't qualify to buy the next house. And they're like, oops, we can't move. Or I had this happen recently. One of my clients was wanting to buy a house and they went under contract. And after the seller did some, paint and carpet and whatever, they just said, you know what? We've just decided we don't want to sell the house, and they've backed out. So the question is, from a legal perspective, what happens? Is the seller required, since they're under contract? Are the real estate, can they sue for performance? I know it's a needle in a haystack, but I think it's something that needs to be had in an initial conversation for a listing agreement for an agent. But what can happen with that kind of stuff? Have you ever had it happen? But what could potentially take place? And I just lost.
Well,
Go ahead.
All of the things that you mentioned can take place. If your realtors are using the GAR contract, which in our area,
Yep.
most of them do, that's the Georgia
Sure.
Association of Realtors contract, that lists within it the remedies for each party. If the buyer breaches the contract, the remedy is the earnest money, which we'll call liquidated damages. Okay.
Yep.
So if the buyer backs out, that's all the seller gets. Now, if the seller backs out, the seller can be sued for specific performance. And that's a real serious thing for a seller, because they can be judicially removed from their home and forced to sell it. And that, along with that, comes any foreseeable and customary costs associated with their delay that they're causing, any downstream things that damages that they could cause the buyer by holding things up. They're liable to both agents for their commission if they do back out. And it's just not a good thing. I think for a seller to put themselves in a position where they don't have a next home locked down,
Yep.
is a very risky and foolish thing to do.
Yep. I know it's a rare thing that happens, but the way I look at it, I have personally been through some of these cases, and it did turn out that they worked it out. They got, people got pissed off, got mad, but it didn't go that far. But I have had it happen without, and it's hard for me because the client calls me. And unfortunately, and the reason I think this is so important, I think for realtors, when they go on a listing appointment, it's not about getting a listing and sticking a sign in the yard. It's about crystal clear communication that if we're about to list your house, is your financing for your next loan 100% done, dialed in, where no surprises can take place? And then if you're going to put the house on the market and somebody gives you a full price offer today, and we don't have the next house identified, and you can't find the next house to buy to identify, what's plan B? And many times they don't have a plan B because it was never even brought up. If if you want to sell your home with no contingency and you want to be sure you get your house sold, are you prepared to move into an apartment, move into your parents' basement, live in somebody else's basement? If you don't have plan A and B lined up already, this is what potentially can happen. And I think the gray area of not having these communications on up front is what gets people burned big time.
100%.
So, and it's rare. I mean, it's rare, but it's one of those. I do believe that if you cover this on the front end and other agents on a listing agreement, if you've got a few folks they're talking to besides you, and these are the things that you communicate, I think it makes you look that much better because you are dialed in on your process and your systems, and you don't leave anything to chance.
Well, you bring up financing just in general as the sort of unpredictable phase in the process of buying and selling a home, and it's not if you use the right mortgage banker, right? Someone like yourself who gets the numbers right the first time. We are seeing an unprecedented number of contracts actually falling out. I think we're at about a 25% rate, which is, and even nationally, if you look it up, there's national statistics on how many contracts are failing after acceptance because of sticker shock when it comes to the financing. At these higher interest rates, the home prices aren't going down. So higher home prices, higher interest rates, all of a sudden people are saying, wow, I really can't afford this. Why did I do this? And that is, well, not something that ever happens with you, I'm sure, but it's poor communication and planning. And then that'll have catastrophic results for the seller who now maybe has gone binding on a home thinking the buyer was going to buy their home. Right. Well, that's just, if it's me or anybody else, whoever, love to be the one, but if it's your lender, be sure that's dialed in, and you as the listing agent, that's where you've got to be sure if a client comes to you and says, well, hey, I'm already pre-approved or I'm pre-qualified, and you do not know who that specific person and who their team is, you're setting yourself up for failure if you're taking that letter just as a blanket and not calling to confirm, because those fall throughs definitely take place. And the number you mentioned about 25% for fallouts, I think 37% of our contracts the last year or so, we were the backup offer because it went under contract with somebody else and it fell through. And I talked to the listing agent and I talked to the seller when we make offers, and I've had them call me. I've had sellers call and say, hey, are your clients still interested? Because we're a week out from closing and it's not closing. And the majority of the time, it's because they couldn't get loan approval. Even though they had a pre-approval letter that was submitted, it was from some Yahoo on the internet, and the realtor didn't know who it was, and it fell through, and we were the backup. So it's just one of those that is just so important. But this is the one that I believe for the listing agents when they go in, is just about being crystal clear with your client. And if you add that a part of your listing presentation about how important this is, and just be prepared and have a backup plan in place if you go under contract where you're going to move to, it makes you look that much better as a realtor and professional. Thoughts? 100%. I think what's going to separate the professionals from, the amateurs or the kind of the newer agents is the ability to think 3 or 4 steps ahead for your client, because a good realtor has done this, might do this 20, 30, 50 times a year. Your seller is going to do it once every 10 years. They simply don't have they don't have the bandwidth to think about every little thing that can happen, and that's the realtor advantage that it gets overlooked. There's so many things, so many predictors that a realtor can go through, a checklist, mental checklist, conversations that can be had with sellers that can have long-lasting impact on their financial well-being.
Right. Awesome. Brother, thank you.